Let's now talk about Microsoft disaster recovery solution called Azure Site Recovery. In this lesson, we'll focus on how you can get your primary site up and running in the event of a disaster. The original intent of Azure Site Recovery is to provide site recovery, although you can definitely use it for migrations. Site recovery has automated replication process from primary to secondary, and you can configure that. Azure Site Recovery is backed up by something called as application consistent backups, and this is also based on VSS or pre or post script frameworks. We can replicate in two ways using Azure Site Recovery. You can either replicate from Azure to Azure or from on-premise to Azure. So you may have a lot of workloads on your premise and you want to use Azure Site Recovery to keep a secondary site in Azure. Maybe using ASR for on-premise environments, you can have Azure as primary or Hyper-V as primary or even VMware. You can get support for both Windows and Linux environments. But keep in mind that there are certain limitations to ASR. For example, if you want to migrate from physical servers or from VMware, then there are certain limitations. Also, not all Linux distributions are supported. Let's take a look at few key components of site recovery and let's understand few points from here. So there's a source environment from where the data needs to go and the target environment where the data needs to be replicated. Then there is a replication policy. Replication policy is about configuring how and when you would like to replicate. Before replication is actually committed to the target environment, it needs to be cached on a cached storage account. Another key component is the recovery plan. Recovery plan is, let's say, in the event of a disaster, how do you plan to turn on the new environment? Do you like to start up the environment in a certain order or in groups? Are there any manual steps that you'd like to do? Or do you want to run any scripts automatically when a failover happens? Now let's take a look at ASR in the Azure portal. So here's the three-tier design. There's a web server, an SQL server, an app server. All of these are running in East US. Now, if you'd like to use the capabilities of Azure Site Recovery to ensure that the customers never get impacted if the East US site goes down, we would like to go ahead and utilize the ASR feature. So let's go ahead and create an site recovery plan. Just type site there and select Recovery Services Vault. You're going to create a Recovery Services Vault first, and then I'll just fill it up quickly. Vault name, and I will host this in the West US location because my original resources, all of these are in East US. Say West US here and click on review and create it. Looks like the vault is created, so I'll click on it and see how we can replicate from East US to West US. So if you navigate to the Getting Started section under Site Recovery, you will have the replication options. Well, the first option is to prepare the infrastructure. Earlier, I did mention that we can move from on-premise to Azure or from Azure to Azure. Depending on how your configuration is set, you might want to select these. So these steps will help you prepare the infrastructure accordingly based on VMware setup, Hyper-V, or from Azure. In case your virtual machines are located on-premise, you might want to choose how you plan to replicate. Is it to Azure or to the recovery site? You can just select no if recovery is your objective. You also have the options to select Hyper-V here. How do you want to manage the Hyper-V hosts? And if you're using an SCVMM. Well, like I said, this is the preparation phase, but in our case, we got all the virtual machines in Azure, so we can directly skip to step one here, which is replicating the application. You can either click on the replicate option or under the overview, you got this replicate button, which will take us to the same place. Now, this is where we select the source. In my case, the source is in East US, so I will select the East US in the drop-down menu and then select my resource group, which is prod-rg, and then click on OK. It will now detect all the virtual machines in that resource group, so I can select what I want to replicate. In this case, I will just choose to replicate a web server, and then I'll show you how you can add the rest of them to an application group. So click on OK, let that validation happen. Now on the top, you see the target location. We have all our resources in East US, and now it asks us where would you like your target location to be. These regions that you see are the supported regions that we have as on today. There are a few important things to notice here that you can customize the target resource group, the storage account, virtual network, and disks. Like I said, there's a new site that's being created, a totally new replica or a copy of East US. And to create the replica of the virtual machines, it needs to have some kind of a virtual network, a storage account, and then a resource group as well in the target region. If these naming standards do not follow as per your naming conventions in your company, you can go ahead and click on customize and modify these values here. For now, I'll just close this and see what replication policy is. Well, you can customize the replication policy. It says that the replication is going to happen every 24 hours. But let's go ahead and see what this app consistent snapshot frequency is. This is the RPO. If you have 4 here, that means in worst case scenario, you would lose 4 hours of data. How frequently would you like to have the app consistent snapshots done? App consistency can actually cause certain performance degradation issues. So if you keep it at 1, that means that the snapshots will be taken every 1 hour, and this will hit the performance of your application. We always say that the lower the RPO, better it is, but at the same time, we need to make sure that these values are not affecting the performance of your application. Then there is recovery point retention. What we are saying is that if we set this number to, let's say, 100, you will notice that there's an error message because the maximum value that you can go up to is 72. So let's say you have the number 72 here. It means that the backup is kept for 72 hours. Technically, this 72 hours is not sufficient. So when you're architecting solutions, ensure that you have low RPO and low RTO in picture to ensure that if you ever lose data, you lose minimal data. Then there is multi-VM consistency. In this example, we're using 3-tier model where you got a web server, application, and a database. And you want to make sure that each of the VMs are backed up at the same time. So if the applications are dependent on each other, then this feature really helps. So what we are saying is that applications are grouped together, so they will be backed up together. They will have a crash consistent recovery point, and they will have an app consistent recovery point as well. In this case, I will group them and create a new group, call it business tier, and add my virtual machine to it. Let's click OK, and then click on create target resources. It will take a while to get this done, so I'll pause the video and get connected once it is ready. It took a while to get that sorted out, but then now it's ready. Let's click on enable replication. This replication from source to destination will take some more time because it has to create the entire set of resources in the West Coast. So it might have to go through creation of the resource group, storage account, virtual machines, etc. So I'll pause the lesson again and then we'll get connected once it is ready. Okay, the replication is complete. So now let's go ahead and see the features and what we can configure and how we can control the recovery plans. So I'll scroll down to the bottom and then look at protected items. Under that, once you click on replicated items, you will see the virtual machine that you are replicating from East US to West US. You can click on it further and it looks like there's a warning that means the replication is not 100% complete. But then once you click on it, you will be able to see the status. So there's a warning here, but then this is more advanced panel here which will let you view the status of your data. The blue little dots are still dotted lines. That means the replication is still occurring. If you recall from this lesson, I was talking about the key components of site recovery, which is the source, East US, the target, which is the destination, West US. You would also have the cached storage, which will act as an intermediary before it gets committed to the destination or the target. What you can run is a failover. There's a test failover that you can also do. And at some point in time, if you would like to disable the replication, that option is also here. Let's go ahead and look at another key component, which is recovery plans. If you click on recovery plan, you're ready to create a recovery plan. So I'll give it a name. Let's call it plan 1. And this is for my East US site. And what kind of deployment model would you like to choose? I'll select Resource Manager. Classic will not be used anymore. It's going to be deprecated. So I'll select Resource Manager and then select the items that I want to keep as part of my recovery plan. What you will see is that there's a business tier. Yeah, I can select it and say OK. And then OK to that as well. Now my recovery plan is being created. What is it that you can do here? We discussed about recovery plans earlier when I was talking about the key components. So one is a source, other is a target, you got a storage account, and another one is the recovery plan. So in the event of a disaster, how do you plan to turn on the new environment is controlled by this recovery plan. Would you like to start up the servers in a particular order, or are there any manual steps that needs to be done, or do you need to run those scripts automatically? Well, that's what you got here. Okay, now that I'm in the plan here, let's go look at these options. Now, if you click on customize, there are interesting options that you will see is that once you expand on it and then click on these three little dots, which brings up the context menu, and then select the pre-action and post-action. This is what I was referring to. So you can add a script, a manual script, or any kind of actions that you may want to take when the recovery actually happens. You can also link it up to your Azure automation account. At this time, I do not have an automation account, and that's why it's all grayed out. But then you can write a manual action if you'd like to do so. The script that's in place here, should that be executed during a testing process or the actual failover? These are interesting options that you can have here. But remember, we've got three servers in this tier and we are protecting just one server. So we've got just the web server in this group, but how do we make sure that all the three servers, SQL and the app server, are also backed up together? If you remember the multi-VM consistency concept, where we would like to have all the VMs being backed up together because they are all dependent on each other. So that's where the multi-VM consistency helps. So let's see how we can add it together. So for me to add those two virtual machines as well, the application and the SQL server, I need to go ahead and replicate them first. So I'll click on the replicate button and go through the same process. Yep, source location is East US, leave this as same thing, click on OK, and this time I will select both of these virtual machines, click on OK, but here I will choose to customize the replication policy. So I'll click on that, and then under multi-VM consistency, I'll select yes, and the replication group I'll choose as use existing, because I don't want to create a new group because we already have a group with the name business tier. Now in this tier, just one server exists, which is web server, and I would like to add app server and SQLDB together so they will have the same set of policies. Now I'll click on create target resources and then finally enable replication as well. And this replication of VM will take some time. So I'll pause the lesson and then connect once it is ready. Okay, looks like the replication of the two other virtual machines, the app server and the database server is complete. Let's go check in the replicated items. Now under business tier, which was the name of the replicated group, if I expand this, I've got all the three servers here. Although they are in the group, but then the replication has not completed yet because of the size of the virtual machine and it will take some time. The recovery plans out here is really a powerful tool within the Azure Site Recovery. In the event of the disaster, you can configure it in such a way that you can recover with minimal loss. There are certain considerations that we must look into. One is that the oldest recovery point you can have is up to 72 hours. The data between the target and the source is constantly replicating, so there may be certain performance impact on your applications. Just to wrap up this module, what we learned here is the recovery time objective and the recovery point objective can be configured for the replicated items. Azure Site Recovery helps us to create a secondary site in the event of a failure, so you will have the secondary site ready just in case things go wrong. The key components of Azure Site Recovery are the source environment and the target environment. What we configure is the replication policies, so you can set the application consistency levels, multi-VM consistency, and also recovery point retention. What you'll also need is a storage account which acts as a temporary storage between the primary site and the target site.